The air felt like a damp, grey rag pressed over Talia's face. It was ration day, and as always, it seemed to rain. Not that anyone dared feel sorry for themselves over the weather. Feelings came in neatly measured increments, issued by the Allocation Council via the implants humming quietly beneath everyone's skin. Talia couldn't remember a time before the Allocation Council, the emotion rationing system installed by the alien conquerors decades ago. They said it was for peace, for stability. Talia knew better. It was control, a noose around humanity's spirit. Talia hurried through the crowds, her allotment of mild contentment making even these miserable, sodden streets bearable. The shuffling masses, faces carefully blank, moved with the practiced docility of a well-oiled machine. She knew just how easy it was to slip into the greyness and become part of that faceless tide. As she turned down a shadowed alley, her pulse quickened with a not council-sanctioned thrill. Anticipation laced with a hint of fear. This risky little spice packet cost extra, but sometimes the emptiness became too much. The door at the end of the alley creaked open as she approached, the smell of stale sweat and old electronics wafting out. A wizened man with eyes like tarnished coins peered out at her. "You got the creds?" his voice rasped. Talia flashed her wrist chip with its depleted emotional balance. It beeped feebly. Old Eli's mouth twitched into a semblance of a smile. Come in, got a fresh batch. High grade." He led her down a narrow, dusty corridor deeper into the darkness. The faint murmur of voices grew louder as they approached a battered metal door. Eli punched a code, and it slid open with a rusty screech. Inside, the room hummed with a desperate, giddy energy. Unlike the streets, faces here were vivid, flushed with laughter, twisted in anguish, etched with shock. People clustered around grubby tables, their implants' telltale lights winking in the gloom. Each surge in the lights meant an illicit transfer, a forbidden sip from another person's emotional reserves. "Pick your poison!" Eli waved a gnarled hand at the room. Talia felt a throb of yearning mixed with revulsion. It was all so messy. Humans were not designed for this. The council, for all its rigidity, was right about that. But she'd tasted the black market's wares before. The memory lingered, the intoxicating explosion of unfiltered joy, a burst of pure colour in a washed-out world. Desperation had a bitter tang, but it was better than the suffocating neutrality of everyday life. Talia scanned the crowd. Her usual seller, a scrawny woman with haunted eyes, was nowhere to be found. Panic prickled at the base of her skull. Without her normal dose of despair, the council-mandated contentment would swallow her whole. "Easy now," Eli seemed to misread her tension. "Find someone who's got what you're after, agree on a price, and link up. First-timers usually go for something soft." His gaze flicked toward a couple near the corner, a giggling girl, her cheeks flushed with euphoric delight, and a young man whose brow was furrowed, leaking sorrow in sticky trails. Talia hesitated. Euphoric delight sounded tempting, but the emptiness always kicked back twice as hard when the high wore off. "Something a little sharper," she said slowly. "I saw someone." Her voice faltered. A man, thick-set and scarred, sat alone in a dim corner. Beneath his skin pulsed a dark, swirling light that made her stomach clench. Rage, raw, unbridled rage, called to something inside her, a knot of tangled emotions she couldn't name. The fear she'd purchased from Eli battled with reckless, trembling curiosity. What would this forbidden fury feel like? Would it sear away the deadening sameness of her days? Eli followed her gaze. Ah, him. That's a premium feeling. That one is. Expensive and volatile. He hesitated. Are you sure that's what you want? Talia nodded, her words barely audible. Yes, I need that. He shrugged, a flicker of disapproval in his ancient eyes. Your credit's your choice. He'll break you if you can't handle it. With a newfound resolve, Talia crossed the room towards the stranger. Each step felt heavy, yet exhilarating. As she sat opposite him, his eyes lifted, and a jagged spark of recognition jolted between them. You're new, he stated, his voice rough. Talia swallowed. I want what you have. His lip curled into a sneer. You don't? This, he gestured to the angry crimson pulse beneath his skin. This is a fire, little girl. You'll get burned. I can handle it, Talia insisted, her voice stronger than she felt. The council's dose of contentment was wearing thin, and the emptiness was gnawing at her newly awakened senses. He studied her, doubt etched into his stubbled face. Finally, he shrugged. Your funeral. Eli materialized nearby, his grin a yellowed tombstone. Ready then. Double rate for this one. Risk premium. Talia flashed her wrist chip, the transaction draining the last of her week's credits. It had to be worth it. This jolt, this promise of something, felt more important than credits or consequences. They joined hands across the table. Talia closed her eyes, braced for whatever was to follow. With a crackling surge through the implant, the transfer began, and the world exploded. It wasn't the sweet oblivion of euphoric delight, or even the dark comfort of sorrow. Every inch of her being vibrated with pure, unadulterated fury, a hot, acidic flood seeping through her veins like poison. It was the rage of every injustice she'd quietly endured, every stolen dream, every stifled word. It was a wildfire threatening to consume her. Then, as suddenly as it hit, the torrent receded, leaving her gasping and trembling. She opened her eyes, the man across the table watching her, with a curious glint in his own. You're still standing, he observed, a hint of reluctant admiration in his tone. Barely, Talia gasped, her heart thundering like a battle drum in her chest. The grey neutrality of her daily existence seemed laughably thin now. So, the man leaned forward, conspiratorial. What fire did they smother in you to make you seek out this? The question cut through Talia's ragged thoughts. Until now, life had been about survival, about getting through each day without slipping into the abyss of despair lurking behind the Allocation Council's calm facade. She'd never considered what might have kindled the fury she'd just tasted. They stole something. She finally found her voice, the words heavy. Not an object, but a feeling, a hope. As she spoke, memory unfurled like a long-forgotten banner. Her sister, eyes blazing with joy over a book of poems her meagre rations couldn't afford. The allocation officers, arriving with their emotion dampeners, extinguished that spark. Her sister's descent into the silent, obedient masses. I think they stole my love, Talia whispered, the realization dawning cold and clear. The love for my family, music, everything beyond just existing. The man was silent for a long moment. Then, his scarred hand reached across the table and squeezed hers. The touch felt oddly grounding. My name's Kyle, he said gruffly. I think they stole that from me, too. A strange kinship settled between them, a shared understanding beneath the pulsing lights. It was like finding a hidden, defiant melody in a world of regimented sound. "You'll need something to replace that hole, or it'll eat you alive," Kyle warned. "Rage without a purpose is just self-destruction." Talia thought of her empty apartment, the stale nothingness of her days. "Perhaps," she murmured, a defiant glint sparking in her eye. "Rage might be a good place to start." Eli slithered over, his leer back in place. "More?" His eyes flickered between them, hungry. Talia and Kyle exchanged a look. Talia saw a flicker of mirrored determination. "Oh yes," Talia smiled, reaching for Kyle's hand. "We'll take all you've got." Eli's beady eyes widened, and his grin stretched into something grotesque. This was bigger than the usual stolen scraps of illicit emotion. This was business, dangerous, disruptive business, and that suited him just fine. From that moment on, Talia and Kyle became regulars in the underbelly of the mind market. Eli's hidden room became their sanctuary, a place where they fueled their growing fire with stolen bursts of defiance. The stolen bursts of rage transformed into whispers, and those whispers into murmurs. Around them, others started to notice. The weary woman, whose stolen anger finally propelled her to demand a ration increase. The timid man, who, infused with a temporary spike of confidence, finally asked the girl with the shimmering, euphoric delight smile on a date. It wouldn't be a revolution overnight. Not everyone could handle the intensity. Not everyone was ready to risk their carefully maintained emotional neutrality. But the seeds had been planted. Each transaction crackled with potential, not just for the buyer and seller, but for something more significant. Each surge of rage, each flicker of stolen joy undermined the Allocation Council's careful order. It was a rebellion calibrated in nanoseconds, a shared look that said, "We feel this. We exist beyond their control." One rainy ration day, Talia stood amidst the shuffling crowd, her implant dormant and useless against the growing storm within her own heart. She felt her sister's stolen love, Kale's righteous fury, the electric charge of every forbidden connection made in the shadows. It was messy, terrifying, and more alive than she'd ever been. The Allocation Council had rationed emotions, believing control would equal order. They hadn't counted on the human spirit, a bonfire fueled by stolen sparks. Talia realized this was what it was to be truly human, to feel the full spectrum, the beautiful, terrible, magnificent spectrum of the soul. As a genuine smile spread across her face, she knew the mind market wasn't just a place. It was the front line of something far, far larger. Word of the mind market began to spread like a silent tremor. The Council's emotion monitors, designed to detect unauthorized spikes, struggled against the clever chaos Talia and Cole had unleashed. It wasn't just the illicit emotions now, but how people learned to blend them, to find resilience in sorrow, purpose in anger, and subversive joy in the smallest of exchanges. Fear began to creep into the Council's sterile halls. Their algorithms, built on predictability, stumbled over the erratic, passionate behavior blooming across the city. Arrests were made, harsh sentences whispered, but they were fighting something they couldn't quantify or regulate. Strategy sessions now punctuated evenings spent in Eli's cramped room. Talia, Kyle, and a growing network of allies mapped out the city. They tracked the Council's patrols, identified potential safe houses, and passed their knowledge through hidden messages woven into the blandness of daily life. One day, as Talia walked down a sunlit street, something felt different. Gone was the shuffling obedience she'd grown accustomed to. People met each other's eyes, brief smiles flickered. Heads nodded with quiet acknowledgement. No words were said, no overt rebellion, but the air itself vibrated with a quiet defiance. Then, as if on cue, every implant across the city seemed to malfunction in unison. Screens went blank, and the steady hum was replaced with the sound of static. It lasted bare seconds before the council regained control, but those seconds were an eternity. Across the city, thousands of people simultaneously felt the rush of their own uninhibited emotions. It was the spark the bonfire needed. What followed wasn't a violent revolution. It was a million small acts of disobedience. People accidentally bumping into emotion monitors, rendering them useless. A song, its melody filled with longing, hummed quietly in crowded markets. Colourful scraps of fabric, representing defiance, appear overnight tied to statues. The council tightened their control, but with every crackdown, the resistance grew stronger and more creative, and Talia, once adrift in a sea of emptiness, found herself at the helm of something extraordinary. Her heart still ached with the loss the council had inflicted, but it also thrummed with a defiant, stolen joy. She smiled, the expression genuine and unfiltered. Even if the council crushed them, they'd reminded an entire city what it meant to live, truly live. That legacy was its own kind of victory.